The theater was quiet in a soft and patient way, like it was holding its breath. The lights above the stage were dim, glowing gently like early morning sun through a window. People settled into their seats, coats brushed, whispers faded, and a calm expectation filled the air. On the wide stage of America's Got Talent, everything waited. The judge's table was steady and familiar. Simon Cowell sat with his hands folded, his face neutral but alert. Terry Crews stood off to the side, smiling in his warm way. This was another audition day, another story about to begin, and no one yet knew how deeply it would reach into the room. Backstage, a young Filipino man stood alone for a moment, breathing slowly. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was not tall, not flashy, and not trying to look brave. His hands shook slightly as he pressed them together. Around his neck hung a simple necklace his mother had given him years ago. Behind the curtain, he could hear the crowd, feel the hum of the lights, and sense the weight of the moment. This stage was far from the narrow streets where he grew up, far from the nights filled with noise, anger, and fear. Daniel's life had not followed a smooth path. He grew up in a small apartment where walls were thin and voices were loud. His father had been a fighter, both in the ring and at home. When Daniel was young, he learned to recognize the sound of fists hitting flesh, the sound of plates breaking, and the sound of his mother crying softly in the dark. Music became his hiding place. When arguments rose, he would sit by the window with old headphones, listening to songs that made the world feel bigger and kinder. His mother, Maria Reyes, worked long hours cleaning offices at night. She carried exhaustion in her shoulders, but hope in her eyes. She noticed Daniel's voice before anyone else did. When he sang quietly while doing homework, or hummed while washing dishes, she would pause and listen. She told him his voice was a gift, something meant to lift pain instead of causing it. But dreams were expensive, and survival came first. Singing stayed in the background, like a light kept low but never turned off. As Daniel grew older, the fighting at home grew worse. One night, when he was 16, the argument exploded into something he could not ignore. He stood between his parents, shaking, shouting for it to stop. That was the night he left. With only a backpack and his headphones, he slept on friends' couches, then in his car, then anywhere that felt safe enough. He worked odd jobs, washed dishes, delivered food, and sang wherever he could. On sidewalks, in small bars, in empty parking lots under streetlights. Music was no longer just comfort. It became survival. When Daniel sang, people stopped and listened. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they smiled. Sometimes they left a few dollars and a quiet thank you. He sent most of the money to his mother. They spoke often, sharing hopes and regrets, but also forgiveness. Slowly, carefully, their lives began to heal. When Daniel told her he wanted to audition for America's Got Talent, there was a long silence. Then Maria said she believed in him, the way she always had. Now she sat in the audience, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the stage. She had never been on a plane before coming here. The theater felt huge, overwhelming, and beautiful. She wore her best dress, simple but neat. Her heart beat fast as the announcer called her son's name. When Daniel walked onto the stage, the lights made him squint. He waved shyly, his smile small but sincere. The crowd offered polite applause, not yet knowing what he carried inside. Terry Crews stepped forward and asked Daniel how he was feeling. Daniel laughed softly and said he was nervous, but grateful. He spoke about coming from the Philippines, about hard times, about his mother in the audience. The camera found Maria, and tears already shone in her eyes. Simon Cowell leaned forward slightly, listening. He asked Daniel why he chose this moment, this stage. Daniel took a breath and said he wanted to turn pain into something good, something shared. When Daniel began to sing, the first notes were gentle, almost fragile. His voice did not rush. It moved slowly, like water finding its way through stones. The song spoke of struggle, of broken homes, of holding on when everything feels lost. The theater grew quiet again, but this time it was different. People leaned in. Simon's expression changed, just a little. His eyes softened, his posture relaxed. He was no longer judging. He was listening. As the song continued, Daniel's voice grew stronger. Not louder, but deeper. Each word felt lived in, earned. The pain in his past gave weight to every note. The band behind him stayed subtle, letting his voice lead. In the audience, people wiped their eyes. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth, tears falling freely now. She had heard her son sing many times, but never like this, never with this much truth pouring out. Halfway through the song, there was a shift, gentle but clear. The sadness remained, but hope entered quietly. The lyrics spoke of forgiveness, of choosing love over anger, of breaking cycles instead of repeating them. Daniel closed his eyes as he sang, standing still, letting the moment carry him. Simon Cowell blinked, looking down briefly, then back up. His face showed emotion he rarely allowed on camera. The room felt connected, like everyone was breathing together. When the final note faded, there was a pause. A long, heavy pause filled with feeling. Then the audience rose to their feet. Applause rolled through the theater like a wave. Maria stood as well, shaking, clapping through tears, her face glowing with pride and relief. Daniel opened his eyes, surprised, overwhelmed. He bowed his head slightly, one hand over his heart. He looked toward his mother, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The judges spoke one by one. Howie Mandel praised Daniel's honesty and control. Sofia Vergara smiled warmly, saying his voice carried real life in it. Heidi Klum spoke about bravery and heart. Then Simon Cowell took his turn. He paused longer than usual. He said he had heard many voices over the years, but some performances were not about perfection. They were about truth. He said Daniel's story mattered, and his voice made people feel less alone. Simon stood up. The audience gasped softly. Maria covered her mouth again, almost unable to believe what she was seeing. Simon looked at Daniel and said this was why the show existed. He reached for the golden buzzer and pressed it. Gold confetti exploded into the air, falling like warm rain. Daniel froze, then broke down, sinking to his knees. The sound of applause grew louder, mixed with cheers and sobs. Maria rushed to the stage, guided by staff, and wrapped her son in a tight embrace. They held each other as the gold continued to fall, a moment years in the making. Daniel cried into his mother's shoulder, whispering thank you again and again. She whispered back that she was proud, that he was safe now, that his voice had carried them both here. Simon watched quietly, his eyes wet, his face open and unguarded. Later, backstage, the noise faded into softer sounds. Daniel sat with a towel around his shoulders, still shaking slightly. The moment felt unreal, like a dream that might end if he moved too fast. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand the way she had when he was small. They did not need many words. Everything important had already been said through song, through courage, through standing ovation and falling gold. In the days that followed, Daniel's life began to change. Messages came from people around the world who saw themselves in his story. He was invited to sing on bigger stages, to share his voice in new places. But he stayed grounded. He kept his routines simple. He called his mother every morning. He remembered the nights on the street, the fear, the loneliness, and he honored them by staying kind and focused. Simon Cowell spoke about Daniel in interviews, saying that some performances remind you why you fell in love with music in the first place. He said Daniel did not just sing a song, he shared a journey. For Daniel, the show was not an ending, but a beginning. The real victory was standing on that stage without fear, knowing his past no longer owned him. On a quiet evening after rehearsals, Daniel stood outside the theater, looking up at the stars. The city lights were bright, but he could still see them. He thought about the boy he used to be, hiding behind headphones, and the man he was becoming. Music had carried him through darkness, and now it carried him forward. He breathed deeply, feeling calm instead of afraid. Back home, Maria returned to her work, but everything felt lighter. She walked taller, smiled more, and shared her son's story with quiet pride. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it no longer controlled her. Her son had turned it into something beautiful. Together, they had moved from fight to fame, from silence to song, from survival to hope. And on that great stage, under warm lights and falling gold, a simple voice had reminded everyone listening that healing is possible. That love can grow from broken places. That sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stand still, breathe, and sing your truth out loud.